You got to teach people how to ask the right questions, and you got to have a bank of knowledge to be able to respond in real time to the answer to those questions. How do you pull somebody off the street and plop them into a dispensary and get them up to that level, right? And like so much of this industry, it was just like hit or miss. You just like you either got somebody who knew it all or didn't. It's still a big pain point, I think, in the industry. It's not fully solved, right? It's still something that has to be worked at.
So welcome back to High Touch, the podcast about how cannabis brands and retailers are creating meaningful experiences in the real world. I'm Jake.
And I'm Duffy. We are the co-founders of Sparkplug, and we started this show to talk to the people shaping what cannabis feels like, not just what the cannabis industry sells.
So today we're digging into a part of cannabis retail that doesn't really get framed as an experience design, but that's inventory. And trust us, it is important stuff.
With Danny Gold, it's never just about the tech. It's about how training, buying, brand building are all levers for creating better vibes, better service, and deeper customer connections. So we're so excited to have him here on High Touch. Welcome, Danny.
I'm excited to be here. We've only been talking about cannabis together for what, 7 or 8 years, guys?
Yeah.
Across a couple of companies.
Seriously, yeah, we're stoked to have you, Danny. Thanks for calling in and getting started with us here in one of our first interviews here on the pod. I want to start at the beginning. You know, a lot of people, you're very well connected in the cannabis industry, but for those of you who don't know you, tell us a little bit about kind of your journey to where you are now as CEO of Happy Cabbage.
Oh, long journeys. For those that know or don't know me, I'm an engineer by trade. Like, I'm highly technical. If you talk to me, we end up in the weeds pretty quickly. I was very, very interested in like why we were building certain things, So I found my way to product and worked a lot in kind of just like product creation, right? All aspects of product. And pretty quickly moved into startups. So I've really been in enterprise B2B startups most of my career. Like, I spent about 10 years of my life working on that problem specifically. And then myself and my co-founder, who became my co-founder from ZolTrain, which was my first foray into cannabis, kind of got pulled into cannabis when we were doing a little bit of like a startup accelerator. You might call it like a startup studio now. We were working with a number of startups, kind of being their engineering team and their product team and really helping them bring ideas to that first launch stage and hopefully get them funding. And like, one of them moved on through Techstars, but we got connected through an OG in the Colorado cannabis industry, an OG in the cannabis industry, Jan Cole, who opened one of the first dispensaries in Colorado, medical, 15 years ago now. And when I worked on the brand side, so many people I met, brand founders were like, Jan at the farm. She just told me about the problems she saw at the store, about ideas she had, the concept of like training being so important, like as one of the first stores, and especially with that foundation in medical and, patient care and introducing people to a new product that could help them that they've never bought legally, right? It was really, really interesting to me. So Jan kind of pulled me down the rabbit hole into cannabis and wanted to launch training platforms. She had started working on it. She had started filming content and training content, really for her own store, but saw the need to take that out to anybody. And that's where my first, cannabis company I worked with came from, which was ZolTrain, which was a budtender training and education platform. It was really exciting. It was an exciting industry to jump in. And we kind of put aside, myself and Eric Cobb, he's the CTO of Happy Cabbage, and now put aside our other projects and jumped full in on ZolTrain and started building it and kind of went typical startup, not paying ourselves, just coding and designing and working and working through the problem space and bringing it into existence, and then, taking it to market and raising funds around it, and had a good multi-year run with that one. So that was, 7-ish years ago, I guess now.
How did you think about trying to make the actual experiential training, brand training, and the employee in the store knowing about brands and knowing how to make a customer feel good when they come in? How did that become such a core part of ZolTrain?
There's some practical reasons why we found our lane and went in there. And I think there were some very real like cultural reasons as far as what was underserved. One was, honestly, from a practical standpoint, a lot of the compliance training state by state had to be done in person. or had to be done live. You couldn't do it pre-recorded. I'm enterprise B2B software, right? So we think about SaaS software and building things that scale there without, as many human touch points is kind of the mechanics that make that work. A lot of states were pushing for required compliance training, but a lot of it was required to be in person or live instructor led. That wasn't universally the case. I think a lot of that's changed. But we saw that and we're like, hey, that's not really our lane. That's not where we excel. I've done a lot of video-based products. We've done some video e-learning products. So we think about evergreen training or training that's easy to maintain that people could take at scale, right? 400,000 cannabis employees could take on one day if they wanted to, hopefully. And then, honestly, the problems that Jan specifically talked to as we kind of dove into this at the farm and then the stores we initially rolled out to in Colorado, that need felt like it was met. It doesn't mean that like we couldn't have excelled there, but there were players there. There were people that had done that in other industries that came in that had that expertise. And some of the problems we heard were, I hire somebody, like, do they know the history of cannabis? Do they know the culture of cannabis? Do they know how to talk to cannabis consumers? Do they know how to ask questions to provide basically like really exceptional customer service? And those needs started to jump out about, okay, there's something unique in here that's not covered in the compliance training. And maybe some of them dabbled in, but that's not the goal of the compliance training. The goal of the compliance training was to meet, state mandate or literal compliance. What we kind of hit on was there's all this other aspects that are required to run a really good store, provide a really good experience that surround that, and that's also where the brand things came in there. Because as soon as you go down that route, how do you sell something if you don't know what you're selling? So some of that came into, we provided training like the history and product category training, right? We built a lot of our own in-house training on flower and pre-rolls and edibles and the types of, extracts, especially, right? Like, what is this? What is an extract? What is a concentrate? So we did like category-based training so that people would understand the products they're selling. And that just naturally blossomed into brand training. And all of that was underserved. There was one or two platforms in there, but we thought we had a unique angle on how to deliver it to the budtender. But we just really found that compliance was kind of handled, and maybe we didn't have a unique lens on it or a differentiator that we saw there. But training, when what's your first 2 weeks? What's your first, hopefully 3 months, 6 months at a job to provide excellent service and really help the store excel? There's a lot of underserved areas in there. And as a startup person, that's really what kind of sparked it. Like, all right, let's set aside all the projects and kind of go after this. I saw the stats on how many employees we're gonna grow. Things like what the Vank surveys that, like, at the time it's like we're at 200,000, we're gonna be to 420,000, which we hit, right? We hit those numbers, I think, within the last 2 years. Like, we hit these growth trajectories. Like, that's a lot of people to train. There's probably a business in here.
The role of the budtender in the dispensary is maybe more akin to the role of a combined bartender and pharmacist and salesperson at a Sephora. They have to have such a wide swath of knowledge about not only how is this product going to impact someone's experience based on presumably its chemical composition, but also an understanding of how it's going to impact them maybe in a social environment, and understanding of how its branding is going to relate to that person and whether they're going to feel like this is a good fit product for them. That's a pretty wild set of requirements for a frontline employee. And it sounds like it was pretty evident that there needed to be some method for them to get up to that. I was actually kind of surprised to hear that was something that was more of like a pull from Jan and the farm and the retail side. Because today it feels more like brands are actually pushing to try to get employees to know more about their products so they can sell more. And, there are definitely a lot of retailers that are thinking, how can I get the best employees and train them in the best way? But it doesn't feel like necessarily, it feels like maybe that's reversed a little bit these days.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, like I said, there was a platform or two out there, right, that were doing it. I think, that's always great. You always want that, right? Like, I'm always like the rule of three, like you hope there's 3 people trying to do it, right? But we just saw that there was so much, all the things you said, there's so much to communicate. And the big thing I take away from that's a perfect vehicle for like video and interactive content. And then like, our big innovation at the time was like the Instagram training, right? The mobile It was kind of like a mixture of Instagram stories in your feed, like vertically scrolling mobile. You can just deliver so much information in 5 minutes, versus like a PowerPoint deck. And, we saw like brands were coming in doing in-person training, sampling. They stay there for 45 minutes. They'd have their big presentation. There's a lot of limits in that and how many people you can connect with in person that day. You can't be in every store all the time. So like all those things kind of add up to, okay, we have the tech, we have the tech for this. And when you think about like consultative, like you got to teach people how to ask the right questions, and you got to have a bank of knowledge to be able to respond in real time to the answer to those questions. How do you pull somebody off the street and plop them into a dispensary and get them up to that level? Right. And like so much of this industry, it was just like hit or miss. You just like you either got somebody who knew it all or didn't. And there's a bunch of churn and turnover. And how can you create a consistent experience if you don't have a consistent onboarding and bringing people up to the standards of your store and the knowledge of your store? We really wanted to cover that. It's still not fully solved, right? I think you all are kind of taking that mantle and working on it now, but it's still a big pain point, I think, in the industry. Like it's not fully solved, right? It's still something that has to be worked at.
I think the compliance hurdle is also so massive, right? And it's something that a lot of, is table stakes at this point, but is, like you said, not a solved problem at all, where so many of these stores just can't even begin to think about investing in employee selling expertise or product knowledge or the history of the cannabis industry, because there is a bare minimum of checkboxes that need to be accomplished to meet those state requirements that have to do with taking those IDs, tracking things appropriately in the system, the inventory movement. So a lot, have definitely been through that kind of Rubicon and are out the other end and are able to kind of see the upside now and invest. But I think the graduation of training from cost of doing business to a real investment is, still unfolding before us.
Yeah. And I think ultimately, we decided to kind of roll up with a bigger company and take on some bigger challenges because of those, the things that and feel are needs, but are put on a nice to have in the budget. And honestly, for us, like you look at it and it's like the marketing budget wasn't cut, right? But the training budget was, unless it was mandated. Even states that didn't require compliance training, like state legislation would like cut out compliance training, which is just like wild, like handling, things that you just guard those table stakes. Like you should probably make sure that your employees are up to a bare minimum there. It's like, well, if it's not state mandated, maybe I'm not going to do it, right? I think some of the compliance training companies have struggled because if it wasn't mandated, it got cut in there, right? And I think we were pushed more and more in the direction of, it always fell in trade marketing when you're talking about brands, right? And we wouldn't try to cover that up. We were doing it, whatever the motivations and intent were of like, ultimately, yes, the employee has to be trained on all these brands to provide a good experience. It's required to make the right match of a product. But a lot of that got put in the marketing budgets, and the brand marketing budgets were still healthy, and we were pushed more and more, I think, we did some consumer education and more things in there. And that kind of naturally led to, maybe we roll this up into like a larger marketing play with somebody who's a little more focused on going after that, what's in that marketing budget, which is more than just like the brand training and those kind of things, right? That gets into loyalty, text message and email and repeat customers. And, you bought this and this. We feel like we'd be better served in this industry, kind of consolidating into some similar problem spaces, but the marketing budgets were largely maintained in there. So like training wasn't, and then it kind of got pushed more into kind of trade marketing and marketing, which led, there's more to it than that, but that led to kind of the ZolTrain team rolling into Happy Cabbage, which had a suite of marketing tools in addition to other things.
I'm curious to hear how your experience in the training and sort of experience creation world there has transitioned into, in particular, the focus on buyers and inventory and making sure that store experience is great from a product perspective. What has that transition been like for you in terms of, working on that problem from a different side?
Yeah, I would say largely the lay of the land right now. You do see a lot of vertically integrated operators, and I think that the number of those is increasing. So when we talk about traditional players like a retailer, right? Brick and mortar store that's selling the products. And you got a brand who's creating the products, formulating gummies and packaging them and then selling them to a retailer. And then maybe You've got a 3-tier, a distributor in the middle who is, representing multiple brands and just handling the logistics of, taking payments and warehousing and shipping them to the store, retailer, distributor, brand, right? You see those lines blur, and you always saw those lines blur at like the MSO level, right? But now a lot of the people that are, I would say probably the people that are kind of thriving, even in a tough industry, are vertically integrated, right? They are a retailer and they're selling a lot of their house brand. The margins are better. And then a lot of them are selling their brands to other retailers that also have brands. And you get into that like reciprocal, I'll carry your product, you carry my product. A lot of interesting things in the supply chain there. But when you talk about, that brand, like getting on the shelves and going through that, if you separate it, right, you bring a product to market, it's still a lot of like boots on the ground. Like there's still a lot of brand reps banging on retail doors, like sampling the product, talking about the product. A lot of that hasn't changed. And then you've got retailers that really have to evaluate their menu right now, which gets more challenging to slot in a new product and understand like, where would that gummy fit? Where does that infused pre-roll fit? Where does this prepackaged top shelf flour fit on my menu? If they're doing it right, you're kind of thinking about this menu analysis. And Jake, you said this earlier, like push pull on the training. I think about a shift a little bit of like, I worked on the brand side, really on the push side of that. Like, how do I get this onto the shelf of a retailer and train the staff and move it through the market? It's kind of like a push motion, right? Like I'm bringing this to market. You do a go-to-market strategy, really going to push it out. I think smart retailers right now, sure, they're getting pushed out a lot, but like that's more of like the pull motion of like, do I even have an opening on my menu? Is the market telling me, is this brand heating up for consumers asking for it? Is there a gap in my price point in this category? And I kind of got really interested in those problems because we saw so much of marketing needing to sell overstocked products, even in brand training, right? Like I need to move this product, like this product's sitting on the shelf. You're like, well, that's a symptom of a core problem. Like you don't have the right menu mix. You over ordered.
So what does a great menu mix look like, and how is that strategy different for retailers trying to offer different experiences?
The first thing I'll say about what makes a good menu is probably half as many products as you have. And this is a problem I have with like how the market went so heavy on market data. Like what's selling in Colorado? Well, what's selling in like the Western Slope versus a downtown dispensary versus a suburban dispensary versus a border town dispensary? Those are very different retail brick and mortar shops with very different clientele coming in. So if I'm just like, this infused pre-roll is the hottest thing in Colorado, it might not be for your store. So the first thing I'll say is you've got to look at your data and you have to be obsessive about what's actually selling. We go into like all the tactics and the data behind that. If we want to, like there's a lot of like what you should look at to make that determination. But I think it's curated, as you said. And maybe it's not 3 in a category, but it's probably less than 10 that are similar.
It sounds like being a PM almost, back to, our backgrounds and our core competencies. Yeah. It's all about, curating and a product and experience and hoping people love it. And something that I think that we all wrestle with, and anyone that's building a product out there wrestles with, is balancing your intuition and your vision for something with what you're hearing from the market. Do you think that's something buyers struggle with, of being like, this is a great product, but no one's buying it? And like, why don't you love it? We have that with features all the time. They're like, no, you should be loving this, but they're just not. And like, is that a tension that they hold?
Yeah, it's human bias, right? And human bias is everywhere. As PMs, we have it, and we work hopefully really, really, really hard to offset that with data, right? And listening to customers and then measuring were our bets successful, and then pivoting really, really quickly to be like, I thought that would be the best thing in the world. Like you better measure that in real time and be able to react and hopefully make your bet smaller. So you talk about how to curate menus when you bring in new product, make the bet as small as possible. That's how we do everything, right? It's an experiment. Don't buy 10 cases of it, buy one and measure how it moves and measure it against your standards. And if it doesn't, talk to the brand and talk to your staff and see if there's things that you missed. You don't have to just throw it out. Maybe you didn't train, maybe you didn't promo it well. Like maybe there's all these things you could do that. And then if it's not working, it's not working. And you tell the brand that, and then you look at your menu and you focus on the things that are moving. But you have to offset the human biases. And if you think about this, there's different kind of buyers out there because there's different kind of retail stores. Some of these buyers were budtenders 2 years ago, and they don't have retail purchasing backgrounds. At the largest, retail chains, you might get people that you brought in from a Target. I work with those kind of buyers all the time as well. I learned a ton from those buyers, from the data-driven buying approaches. Like, our product has been heavily informed by large-scale retail brick and mortar buyers because they had tools that none of us have that we're trying to bring into this market. But we want to bring those tools to that buyer that doesn't have professional buying experience to help them look at, here's what you should do and here's what you shouldn't do. And you might love that product. This is always the problem, Cam. It's the problem with Budtenders too. Like, you are not your customer. Like, you might go home and use that product every night. The person at the other end of the counter that you're talking to is not you necessarily. It's great if they are, find that out. So a good menu reflects your customer base and reflects what moves. That sounds like really, really simple. And it doesn't reflect the buyer, and it doesn't reflect the budtenders, and it doesn't reflect the owner. It reflects the people coming into the store. And honestly, I'll put it, you want to put a gold standard out there, take out, things that are like tinctures and topicals that are always going to be slow movers, but you want to carry because they're add-ons and you're going to have customers that come in and they don't buy them super frequently, but you got to have them. Put those aside. But take your edibles and your pre-rolls and your flour and your concentrates and move those products, turn them over every 14 days and show me that you can do that. Show me that the truck can pull up and you can unload it. And then 14 days later, the truck pulls up and you just sold the last unit as you're restocking it. You're talking about a goal set, right? This is like the scenario. This is the aspirational goal. But if you talk to people in retail, that's how retail moves. That's how you manage your cash flow. That's how you manage your inventory. Like, you don't want to be a warehouse. You don't want to be a bank. And dispensaries right now are like warehouses and banks for brands pretty often. They're sitting on inventory that's 120 days old that they overbought or shouldn't have bought in the first place because it didn't fit in a slot in the menu because they're carrying too many SKUs within a micro category. So it's got to reflect your menu, and it's got to turn over fast. It's got to turn over as fast as it possibly can. So like tinctures and topicals might only move every 90 days because that's the case size, and that's fine. Know that. Keep one case and move one case. But your other products in there, turn them over every 14 days.
I think two really incredible things you said there that I just want to make sure we double click on. The first is, you are not your customer. I think that it's so easy to forget that. And it's so easy, particularly when you're in an industry where different layers of the stack have such different consumption habits. I think that really pulling out to the data and using those indicators that you've described around what's your turnover of the full slate of products that you have in store, what does your cash flow look like as a result of that, is so key. Because the second piece, to touch on there, is that so many of the problems that are absolutely buffeting the industry right now, particularly this accounts receivable problem, where a lot aren't able to pay brands for the product that those brands are giving them, is actually not all that surprising, because in standard CPG, retailers exist on a knife's edge all the time. And if you combine that with the lack of working capital that cannabis businesses have, like, it's not that surprising that we have these huge problems with brands getting stiffed by retailers. And it's such an important insight to recognize that that could be meaningfully reduced with really, really good inventory management. If you are really on top of your inventory, getting to that rule of 14 days turnover, then your risk of getting underwater from a cash flow perspective just decreases so much.
Yeah. When you talk about problems worth solving, right? And you mentioned like the AR problem, these really, really big issues of people not getting paid. We experienced that at ZolTrain, right? We experienced that where a brand couldn't pay us, and you pull on that thread. Well, the retailer didn't pay them. You pull on that thread, like, why does the retailer not have this cash flow in here? And when I met, I'd known Andrew Watson for a long time, as we all did. He had built a marketing product, which was really successful in text and email. And he even started to look at this and look at, like, marketing isn't solving the core problem here. Like, we're trying to move overstocked inventory more often than not. We're not always trying to, like, get the best product in Jake's hands. That's going to happen in there. But so much of what marketing was handed was like, we have to clear out. We have 120 days on hand of this. This is aged. This has been sitting here. Like, we have to clear this out because we can't buy new inventory until this moves. And you're like, well, why? And I think about this now and I'm like, okay, today I'm working on problems that actually would impact, ZolTrain of 5 years ago, where I'm solving like a root cause of why ZolTrain couldn't get paid and had AR issues that flow through, because it's like you're overstocked. And we see it every day. We onboard customers, and like the first tab in our app is called Inventory Health, and it shows you what I think are the most important things to look at. I'll say the number one thing, the first column it's sorted descending by is total dollars profit that a brand puts in to the retailer. And it's so surprising how the customers don't understand this. You might look at margin, you might look at like the run rate and the velocity, but when you go to make payroll or you go to make that next purchase of inventory, you're spending cash in your account. Where does that cash come from? Yes, it comes from the profit and the total profit margin, right? It comes from what you paid, what you sold that for, minus the discounts, minus tax, minus what you paid for it. That's the dollars you get back. And I find that honestly, 9 out of 10 retailers don't have a handle on that number. And it's because the point of sales don't report it well. Maybe if they're sophisticated, they built some wild Tableau dashboard to pull in all this data and do all this analysis. But like thinking about, oh no, take the tax out and take the discount out, and then take your cost of that unit out, and then look at that dollar, and now take your brand that you're looking at. Maybe it's your house brand, maybe it's a third-party brand, and say in the last 30 days, how many dollars did it put into your bank account selling that product or that brand set of products? Because that's what you live or die by. Like, that's what payroll is, right? Like, it's dollars in, dollars out, and just getting a handle of that, like, oh, total dollar contribution. And then you look at like, how does that stack? Which brands? Because you sort a page. When I tell you to slim down your menu, you go to that brand page and you sort it by that, and there's 10 per page, and there's 72 brands in there. Those first 8 brands are 80% of your dollar profit. Like, you're making all of your payroll on 8 of those 60 brands every time. And like understanding that, when it's like, that doesn't mean don't carry these other brands or give them a shot or they're not add-ons. Or it's not a simple like cut everything past 8. But you have to understand where Jake, to your point on like just thinking about radical prioritization, where do you put your efforts? Like, this is what is driving the success of your business, and understanding the menu from that and your inventory from that. And how can I turn that over and focus there? And how can I order less of these? And how can I negotiate better, more? It opens up a lot of conversations about like, what do you do with that information? We love actionable data, but we get so many like, like the literal first login, like, you're showing me something I've never seen. Like, I've worked here for 2 years and like I've never seen that number presented in that way. And like, you just see the wheels turning, like with the buyers and the GMs, like right away, like, okay, now I see. I can tell you to slim down your menu. I can tell you to do these things. And then you start to look at, $200,000, $170,000, $89,000, $20,000, $5,000, $2,000. That's how steep that curve is. That first page is like, this brand contributed $200,000 and this brand contributed $5,000. And this is the gradient here. And you don't like, you go to these next pages and like, they're not even paying for a banner on the highway, right?
And what are some of those chunks? You mentioned taxes and discounts, but are those the two big ones? What else is eating into that?
Yeah, it's really, we all know everything's over discounted, right? And some people look at margins without like contributing discounts. Like, so we have point of sales in this market that will show you a margin that includes tax or doesn't include a discount. And you're like, that's not the money I get. I don't get to spend a cent of the tax dollars I collected. I don't get to spend it. And the discount dollars I never saw. And if your average discount is 25 to 30%, and you're making like decisions, like you're off by that much in your dollars that are in your bank account for a cash flowing business, right? And so it's just like wild to think about something as simple as like tax and discounts being things you can't spend, but being on reports, or you're not like being aware of the dollars contributed in there. And these are things, once again, like you look at kind of traditional retail, larger retail coming in, people that have been managing inventory like this for 30 plus years, there is a lot to learn. I know there's always the tension in the cannabis industry, but like the reports they hand us, I want this. And we're like, what's this? It's always the 3-letter acronyms. What's this 3-letter acronym? And you like look at it, like, that's a really interesting way to look at inventory. Like I never thought of that, right? Like percentage of days sold is one, like we're starting to show in there, which is like gets complicated because products go in and out of stock in cannabis. You literally can't order that strain. And it's like, well, you have to figure out the days it was available to sell. What percentage of those days does it actually sell? Because you want a consistent mover. And they're like, I want to see that across our products. Like, nobody's ever asked us that. Somebody just moved over, from traditional CPG asked us for that recently, and we're working on it and we're rolling that out. Because it's an interesting KPI when you think about menu planning and these kind of things. Like, we have so many KPIs in here now. We're pushing out more as we learn from how retail should be managed and how we can improve that retail sell through and reduce your dollars deployed, especially your dollars in aged inventory, which is like dollars you spend in something that hasn't moved in 60 days, that's been sitting there. Is like, that's, that should almost never happen except for a few outliers. Like for 80% of the case, you should never have a dollar deployed in something because there's an issue there, right? There's a reason you spent that money. You haven't seen a dime back for it in 60 days. That's a problem in this industry.
I feel like this is also a really interesting view into what creates a better experience for the customer. If you're actually understanding what it feels like as a customer to walk in the door and experience your store, is actually also what you're describing is sort of the counterintuitive truth of inventory management. The counterintuitive truth with the customer that anybody who is a student of decision making will know is that decision fatigue is a very real phenomenon. If you walk in and there's 50 options to choose from for peanut butter, you'll take forever to choose. You'll be less satisfied with your choice. You might not even choose at all. And when you walk into the dispensary and there's 30 different edible brands and 10 different pre-rolls and all of these different products that are differentiated in ways that don't really mean all that much to you, you're going to have that decreased quality of experience and decreased satisfaction walking away. And a lot of people, I think, want to have that huge menu of options because they think, oh, well, what do consumers want? They want choice. They want to be able to have this brand, that brand. So we have to have them. They just have to be there or else we're going to be considered deficient relative to the. But in reality, those top 8 brands that are giving you all of your profit are giving it for a reason because they're the ones that people want to choose. Because I can actually eliminate all of the exhaustion of having to decide every time I walk into a dispensary what product I want because I know I like this product. And those dynamics in inventory that are so beneficial from a profit margin perspective are also really beneficial for the customer. And that's kind of counterintuitive relative to what I might think if I was trying to build out a dispensary, from the ground up. I'd think choice and opportunity for, trying new products. But in reality, the best of either.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting to tie these concepts together, right? We talked about like budtender training and customer experience in the store. And then we got like in the weeds on inventory and turning over every 14 days and menu mix, right? So why is that meaningful to the customer? At the end of the day, you need repeat customers, you need loyal customers. Like how does that impact the customer experience? You just hit on some great ways. Decision fatigue, like menu over ordering, like they don't care, right? And like, what's the thing most similar to that thing I had the other day that somebody handed me that made me feel good? Like nobody can recall any of these things. We've gone wild on strain names. There's problems in there, right? We've gone way overboard with like some of the hype drops and some things in here. And that in certain markets and certain consumers, that's important. You have to know that and you have to know your data on that and keep that. But that you can't let that dominate your menu. Other things, right? When we talk about turnover, freshness of product. When I talk about something sitting for 60 days, and these products have expiration dates, but as it might still be well within an expiration date, is that product as good, right? Like your terpenes off gas, right? Things decarboxylate when they just sit on a shelf, right? Things degrade into CBN. We can test for mold or these things when it hits the shelf, but are we forcing every market to test it 60 days after it hit the shelf? No. So that is a consumer experience. And if the dispensary is under pressure to move oldest product first, and you walk in and you pay your money for that oldest product and you don't have a good experience, are you coming back to that store? The stores that turn over faster have better products. They have fresher products. That's a better consumer. That's what you're paying money for, right? Inventory matters to that consumer in there at a very, very real, very, experiential. We live and die by repeat customers. So inventory turnover absolutely matters to the customer there, because you are going to move the oldest product first, right? It's first in, first out sales in this, and you train the customers to that, and you move those old batches first. That's everything, right? And if you turn it over quickly, guess what? It's a fresher product. It's just like, that's the flywheel of a retail store that you want to get into. You don't want to be returning old products. You don't want to be expiring products. Customers want fresh products. You need to carry them. You got to turn it over like cartons of milk, 14 days. That's probably the expiration on it.
Nice. So what is one trend in cannabis retail that you think is overhyped and one that you think is underhyped, not getting enough attention?
Ooh, I'll caveat this. I said it earlier. It's all hyper local. Like, know your customer, right? What matters is who's coming in, what are they buying, what are they asking for, what's in there. I do think the strains have gotten like way overhyped. Like, no, tell me a strain, we should play a game, toss out a strain name and try to guess like what the lineage is, or where it fits on terpene spectrums or effects in there. Just that constant like drop. We have to release a new strain name, and the next strain name has to be wilder than the last to capture attention in there. I just think we've lost the consumer and we've lost the thread, and it's lost all meaning. So I love that, like, some flower. I'll say this in the pre-roll category. I love that the pre-rolls even have moved into like effect based, and it's like calm energy. And you see these multi-packs sometimes where it's like, you get like 3 different strains in there, closer to different terpenes and different THC percentages that are making up what we hope is that perceived effect. But I love that, like, that movement from a wild training that's meaningless to just like, can I have a chill pre-roll, for when I walk the dog? Thank you for that, curve, and I will continue that. But I think the strain names are like way overhyped, and I want to see them go away. If you look at cannabis trends, you will absolutely see that pre-roll category like going up. You kind of just see like those big categories in there. Flower still dominates, it's still hovering in that 40 to 55% of all sales is flower in there. But we're seeing pre-rolls like move up, and that's not slowing. Like, we're seeing more pre-rolls, of course, infused pre-rolls, Jeter's kind of like driven that in the different size and the infused, and those have taken over for those high dose consumers. But even down to like, the kind of lower THC dog walker style, right? Like a 1/4 gram. That's more like my vibe is like, what's a 15% THC 1/4 gram, like true dog walker? Those kind of
I love the
things,
name, the dog walker. That only really clicked
yeah.
for me recently.
I'll call it a specific brand that I think is killing it in Colorado, Denver market is like Binsk. They sell 7-pack 1/4 gram pre-rolls that are fantastic, that are kind of in that true dog walker category. I think that we're seeing those multi-pack pre-rolls, smaller sector rolled multi-packs, are really growing. So stock those if you're not. Look at your inventory, look at your customer base, but we're seeing those move.
Cool. Awesome. Danny Gold is the COO and head of product at Happy Cabbage Analytics, and one of the cannabis industry's clearest thinkers on data, training, and buying, shaping the real world retail experience. He joins us from Colorado, where he lives with his wife and kids. Thank you, Danny. This was a ton of fun. Appreciate you taking the time.
I really appreciate you guys. Always a pleasure to chat here 7+ years later.
Well, that's our episode. Thank you to Danny for keeping it real, helping us zoom out on how training and buying are actually the bedrock of that retail experience. If you like this conversation, please drop us a review, share it with someone building in the space. Make sure you've subscribed. High Touch is produced by us, Jake and Andrew, with help from Isabel Carter. We'll be back soon enough with another episode on how cannabis brands and retailers are shaping culture, the industry, and the in-store experience. We'll see you then.